there's someone in this community that needs to meet someone else in this community. I don't know for why yet. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but like it definitely exists. And so many of us are like one really powerful connection away from achieving something miraculous. This is such a smart question. It's a great question, though. Like, it definitely is. It's a really, really good question, and it's a really apt observation. Kudos to you for like doing the best research out of like any host I've ever interacted with. The first cohort we ever ran for 8 weeks, we had them do like 6 case studies in 8 weeks. It was wildly intense. But if you talk to any of them, I mean, they're still referencing these case studies like 3 years. The general professional audience, like, they don't really give a shit, like, who wrote the study or what the study did or blah, 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 blah. What they want is, like, the day after the course, I have a new one-on-one template I can use with my direct reports. The day after the course, I have a retrospective template I can use with my team. I think this is one of those things that, like, people would be surprised at. You're not going to read 99,999 profiles to decide, okay, this is the best person to talk to. This is a thing where like actual automation can actually be really beneficial to increasing almost contradictorily the personal touch. If you're early and you're fighting for customers, like, what else are you going to do? If it's a time-bound, shorter run community, like 2 months or less, I would go off Slack. If you have a long community that's kind of always on, I would go with Slack, because there's no way someone's going to keep coming back to Circle every single day for 2 years. If it was driving so much impact, but you weren't able to keep it afloat, like, now you've lost the ability to continue that impact. And that's not good. So like, now the fact that we can't do it anymore means like the world is missing out on, something good. I think life is a series of contradictions, and I think it's my philosophy major is coming out, but like, that is kind of a really profound thought.
Welcome to Beginner Maps, where we interview operators of top community businesses so you can replicate the best of what these community builders have already figured out. Today, I am thrilled to have Kyle Hagge with us for the second time. Kyle is the Chief of Staff at Morning Brew. Before this, he was Director of Community at Morning Brew's Learning Division, which created cohort-based courses for business leaders. This was Morning Brew's first paid product, and my LinkedIn feed would keep getting flooded with love from their customers whenever Kyle posted something about it. So Kyle, I am thrilled, honored, and excited to welcome you again to the podcast for this special reflection episode.
I'm super glad to be back. Thanks for having me, and I always love chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. So Kyle, how would you describe the people who joined Learning Brew?
Yeah, I would say that we have this saying internally, like, successful but not satisfied. So that's probably how I would describe them. People that were, maybe early, mid, even late career professionals. So the time in career wasn't necessarily super important, but they felt like they were doing really good in their career, and they wanted more. They wanted to learn a new skill. They wanted to build their network. They wanted to grow in their career. And that's really what we aim to do with these, variety of cohort-based courses and communities we launched. And I would say that the other thing is, it wasn't industry specific or role specific. So people that tended to have maybe a little more generalist mindset, if they were working in finance, they thought it would be interesting and rewarding to be in a cohort along someone that was in operations and in HR and in product. So we didn't really run specific role or function focused courses.
And in terms of how many of them were a part of the Morning Brew newsletter, or were getting the newsletter before, did you track that? Were all of them members of the newsletter and then got into the community? Was that
I don't think we did a good job of tracking that, honestly. And it's a little difficult, because if you join the course, and you're probably going to end up subscribing to Morning Brew in one form or fashion, does it count if they're a subscriber to HR Brew and they take the course, but not Morning Brew? Like, does that technically count? So there's a few like definitional issues with trying to figure that out. I would say for the most part, like, let's be real, like, they probably knew Morning Brew, and they were, they had trust in that brand over a long time of reading the newsletter and understanding that we're smart, we're witty, we're irreverent, we're fun, we're going to give you the information you need. that they trusted us to be able to build high quality connective courses for them as well. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that's showing that, building an audience and kind of taking them down funnel, turning that into a community, charging money for a product is definitely a thing you can do if you have a really solid audience up top.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a bad thing. It's like the dopest thing, especially for the people listening who are creators themselves, who have an audience, and now they're trying to turn that audience into a paid community so that they can make a business and a living out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So talking about the courses, in one of the interviews that I was watching to prepare for this, you mentioned that communities should exist to solve a problem, and that is something that a lot of people miss when they think about communities. So you ran a bunch of accelerators like Business Essentials, Business Analytics, and some short sprint courses for financial forecasting, negotiation strategies, difficult conversations at work, like a lot of these really, really interesting course topics. Now, how did you decide, or your team decide, which course to pilot and which one to, not pilot?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one, kudos to you for like doing the best research out of like any host I've ever interacted with. It's refreshing to talk to someone that like spent the time to understand the business. How we decided what to do next, I mean, I think it's a mix of everything. It's an art and a science. The art part is like courses that we thought would be interesting. We had a lot of people in our team that had been in the kind of professional development L&D space for a while. So like, there's just some like classics that are always going to be relevant. A new manager course, like that is something that HR teams want to bring in house, want to purchase, etc. So, that's the art part. The science part is like, yeah, what do we know our audience wants? And so we did do some surveys of our audience and of previous customers and of our alumni, like what courses are you most interested in and what courses would you pay for? And then you kind of have your art list and your science list. And if there's any overlap between the two, like those are probably the courses you want to try first. And that's kind of how we went about it.
Okay, so when you say that there are like general evergreen courses, then that also means that there are a lot of other options for people. So, for example, if I take, let's say, new
Great
manager
point.
course, I think there are like the internet is flooded with people who are trying to teach people how to be great new managers. So, did you like have an angle that would make that your course new and make people want to take it over anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really good question. And it's a really apt observation that if something is very classic, then and like popular, there's going to be a ton of people competing for those customers. So you do have to have a differentiation factor, which is like, the case for every business. So I would say like we were an extension of Morning Brew, but in the learning space. So we were smart, we're witty, we're irreverent, and we're fun. We're going to be much more tongue in cheek and much more irreverent and much more joyful and playful than taking some new manager course from Harvard Business School, for example. Now, this is not like a stack ranking, like, and because of that, we're better than HBS, or because of that, we're worse than HBS. It's just about having a lane and really owning that lane and then getting the customers that are interested in that lane. And so, it's another kind of concept of like niching down, like instead of having a new manager bootcamp course for every possible new manager, we're the new manager bootcamp course for like kind of like the modern, savvy, smart, like witty, like kind of like the Morning Brew audience manager. Maybe we're not the best for someone that is a little more traditional or wants the credentialing that a Harvard can give you. And that's a really powerful thing. So, you can always compete on that. You can compete on price, but I think that ends up being a like race to the bottom. So you have to have something better than just like we're cheaper. And so, having some sort of identity, some tone. The other thing is like we weren't really taught by academics. Like I would teach our new manager course. Like, yeah, I have a master's degree. It's in political science. It's like totally unrelated. And so I wasn't, I don't have a PhD, and so I'm speaking as like a practitioner, and honestly, as someone going through very similar challenges as a new manager, because I myself was only a manager for about 2 years at that time. Obviously we did a ton of research into our courses. We were guided by someone who had a PhD and who was a business instructor. So it's not like we're just making shit up, but sometimes one of the best elements of your business is like the audience sees themselves as the instructor. Like, sometimes you take a course and you feel like the person teaching you is like 3 steps above you, and it's hard to like really see how it's helpful to you where you're at now. Sometimes the best instructor is like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ahead of you. And it's like, oh, they just went through what I went through. They're very relatable. They remember what it was like to be me. And I think that is another one of our core strengths, was like that relatability and that kind of openness.
So the fact that you taught the new manager course makes things even more interesting. I can now dive into what you were teaching and how you thought about the course material. So I mean, so you were a new manager yourself. You've been doing it for say 2 years now. Then
Yep.
so how did you decide like what would be really interesting or what would be useful for the students to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to another one of our core strengths or core differentiators. If you could take a lot of courses that are really rooted in theory, and you'll read about some, tend to be like 98-year-old white dudes that did a research report in like 1972. And again, like I actually geek out about those studies. I do love them, and like they're really interesting. And the theory should inform a lot of the practice. But for the most part, like a general professional audience, like they don't really give a shit like who wrote the study or what the study did or blah 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 blah. Like they're super busy. They're carving out maybe 3 hours this week to go through a new manager course. What they want is like the day after the course, I have a new one-on-one template I can use with my direct reports. The day after the course, I have a retrospective template I can use with my team. The day after the course, I'm now thinking about radical candor and the framework of being kind and direct that I can use with my team. So they're in it for impact, and they're in it for tangible takeaways that they can use immediately to make an impact in their role. And so that's another thing that we would lean into, is like it's informed by theory, but we're not going to even like go into that. We're just going to tell you like the tools, the tactics, the tips, the tricks you need to know to make a difference tomorrow. That's what we would lean into. I think the other thing that we did a great job of is like situating these tools with again concrete examples of like how I was using them with my team. It's not some academic that's like, and I heard that teams are using this in this way, but like I myself aren't a business operator. Like I'm telling you like directly, like this is what I do with my team every week. And my team is probably not too dissimilar from yours. Like this is how you can use it. So I think that was a really powerful way to like differentiate us, make us a little more relatable, and really focus on like impact and the tactical nature as opposed to theory.
I love this. Now, there's one more thing that I know you did that informed your, course decisions and decisions was the alumni advisory board. So I know Adam Barney and Kumar shared from different communities, and they were both a part of this alumni board, at least at some point. And these
Yeah.
are both really busy consultants, and they were still volunteering to be a part of this board and helping Morning Brew, make more out of this business. So, what was it, do you think, that got people like Adam and Komal interested in joining the board? And can you speak about how you utilized their feedback?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is kind of one of the maybe differences between audience and community. And that is like people that feel a sense of community with your product or your brands, I mean, it's a community, like they love it. And, the best communities don't feel very top down. They feel very emergent, feel like everyone in the community is like kind of growing the community together. And if people feel like, hey, this place on the internet or in person or wherever it might be is like bringing me significant joy and camaraderie and purpose, like they don't want to see it go away. They want to see it keep growing. And so if you build a great community product, there's going to be people that like want to help you, quote unquote for free, because like they're actually getting a ton of value out of the community. It would be worse if it went away. So like they're going to contribute their time, their talent, their treasure to having it continue on. So, I don't actually think it's too hard. I think we all have, done volunteering in some capacity for organizations we really care about. We think they're impactful to our lives or someone else's. How we take feedback, it's interesting, like any type of feedback, you often know more than the people on the board. are on an advisory board, which is like maybe people don't want to say that, but like it can be tough because like you're thinking about these problems every single day and like you're getting paid to do it. And it's very easy to just like pop into a meeting and be like, do this, solved. And it's like, yeah, we thought about that and it doesn't work for X, Y, and Z reasons. So, I wouldn't say like an advisory board is there to like necessarily like make some hard decisions for you. I think what you're looking for is like patterns. So if you have four, five, six people on a 10-person board saying the same thing, like, okay, this probably is an issue that we're overlooking or we're not thinking about properly. That's when you really want to like act on it. I think also like they just might be able to surface some data for you. They're closest to the action. They might be hearing things from other members that the members themselves aren't comfortable sharing with you, possibly. And what you want to do there is the classic like, your customer doesn't really know what they like wants. They just know the problems. And so a board is really good at kind of servicing some problems. Their solutions may or may not be perfect, but that's kind of the reason you're paid is like you need to go figure out those solutions. So they surface problems. They're there as a sounding board. They're there as like kind of a micro community for you. And then it's on you to like take their feedback and do something about it.
And talking about the format, like how would you take feedback? Was there a monthly alumni meeting, or was there a private group where everybody was there and they can just you were always listening essentially?
Yeah, both of those things. So we had like a private Slack group with our advisory board for like ad hoc, one-off, random discussions. And then we had a set once a month, I think it was, meeting. Maybe it was once a quarter, once every 2 months. I think it was once every 2 months, actually, now that I think a little more deeply about it, where we'd have a deck, we would talk about kind of what we're thinking about and questions for them and getting some feedback from them. There also can just be great like connectors, and maybe they know someone that would be really helpful for us to talk to. So we utilize them in a variety of ways, both kind of ad hoc and structured.
This is amazing. This is so like such a really insightful thing to that most people, most communities that I've seen are not doing. And I've been a part of a lot of communities, and I'm like, hey, if there was an advisory board, I want to give them so many ideas, but there's just nothing there. And yeah, all of my ideas and my passion for that community fizzles down.
Mm, interesting.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the community part of the experience, the learning experience that you created, which is something I feel that was really interesting and really unique about the way you ran your cohort-based courses. So another one of interviews, you said people join community for transformation, and that is possible only through discomfort. So putting them in situations that are hard but they feel safe in is paramount. So can you
Hmm.
unpack this a little bit and maybe how you use this in your courses?
Yeah, I mean, I think that framework is generally true that you're unlikely, change is really hard for people, myself included. We're creatures of habit. We feel safe with the status quo. And so to grow does require you to get a little uncomfortable. If you, become a great public speaker, for example, it's unlikely that your first time public speaking, you knocked it out of the park or you were super confident going in. You had to get uncomfortable. You just had to go and do it. And through repetition and practice, you start feeling a little better. So, I think that's true. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about learning. There's some really interesting studies about professor rankings and actually how much people learn. I think is really relevant to this conversation. So I know they've done a study where like they looked at the professors that had the highest scores, the highest rankings in like university. And in this particular study, they found that like the students actually learned the least and they were ranking their professors high because like they weren't like it was fun. They weren't feeling challenged. Like they felt really great. Oh, this is easy. I love this guy or this gal. The professors that had like there's low like professors that had really low scores, that was like they didn't actually do well. Like they were like, no, they're bad teachers. But it was the professors with like the middle scores. People would be like, this class was too hard. But like if you followed up with them, they actually retained the information the most. So it is a balancing act of like pushing people but then kind of giving them the context of like why you're pushing them, which is the sweet spot. And so the first cohort we ever ran for 8 weeks, we had them do like 6 case studies in 8 weeks. It was wildly intense. It was probably too intense, to be honest. But if you talk to any of them, I mean, they ended up like loving it, learning a lot. They're still referencing these case studies like 3 years later. I just saw a note about an Under Armour case study we did literally 3 years ago. So it was intense, but I think we always told them like, look, like we're pushing you for a reason. This is eventually going to end, but like you signed up to this to grow and to learn. And we would be failing you if we just put you in this, super comfortable environment. Why give us money to do that? Like you gave us money to like push you, get you out of your comfort zone, force you to really try to grow. And that's what we're going to do, obviously, in a respectful way. So that's one way that we kind of force people out of their comfort zone, is like you just give them like a lot to do and push them.
Right. And did you feel that, like, what was the acceptance amongst the students about this being pushed so hard? Like, were they more receptive towards this than you might have expected, or what? What was the feeling?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that, besides just to say, like, think of a time in your own life you were pushed. And what was the quality that the person who was pushing you had that made you keep going? And, for me, it's like, it's both like a pushing is like, hey, you're not, like, almost by definition, like you're not good enough. Like you could be better. You have more potential, which is kind of like tough to hear sometimes. Like, oh, if you're pushing me, it means you don't think I'm good right now, or that's tough. But I think the people that are really motivating do that, and they have this like unwavering belief in you despite that, or like in combination with that. It's like, I'm actually pushing you because I know you can get to where you need to go. I know you can reach your full potential, and I'd be failing that potential if I didn't push you. And so I think that's probably very similar. Like if you can create an environment that's both like, hey, like we're going to work hard and we're going to push you, but it's because I know you can get there. I think that's probably like the combination that's the most effective. And thinking back to coaches or mentors in my life, that's definitely the qualities that they had.
I think, I remember that story you said in the first interview where you would record acceptance videos for every candidate yourself. And maybe like I think that also created a level of trust with them that may also, be tell them that okay, Kyle Hagge knows who I am and he's doing it because he probably understands where I want to go.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And about that acceptance video, so I was rewatching the recording, and you mentioned that you recorded this acceptance video before the people had paid a single dollar. Is that right?
Yeah, it was like, you're accepted, you're in, please pay us.
Wow. And you did this for everybody, whether they did not pay or paid. And like, would you say that this is a good strategy for increasing the conversion rate from acceptance to them becoming a customer?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely in a vacuum is a it will increase conversion. I think that's just like almost obvious. Like people respond to effort and to personality and to personalization more than they're going to respond to something that feels very automated and inhuman. So it does. Now, like, taking a step back and taking it out of the vacuum bag, is this something that you should do? It probably depends on like where you're at in your business. Like, yeah, like it's a lot of time. So you
Yeah.
only have 24 hours a day. And so you're going to have to determine, like, is the optimal use of my time staying up till 3 a.m., staring directly in a ring light, ruining my retinas forever? Maybe, maybe not. I would say if you're early and you're fighting for customers, and you're a new business unit or you're a new company entirely, like what else are you going to do? You got to get your first customer somehow. If you're, I think if you're Amazon, I don't need like Jeff Bezos recording a personal video every time I buy a stick of toothpaste on Amazon, because like, they already know. So depends on where you're at, depends on what else you have going on your plate. But I do think being that gritty and that like, I'm just going to run through any wall early on, it's the only way I know how to make it work.
I love this. I love this strategy as a new creator or new business owner. Now, what outcomes were you tracking for these courses?
The outcomes that we were tracking in terms of once someone finished was self surveys about like how much they enjoyed the course. So like our main thing was NPS, which is just like how, obviously, like would you refer this to a friend or colleague? And so, it's one of those things I think in all learning products, going back to this idea of like I just talked about how rating the professor is kind of bullshit. And then I'm saying like we had them rate the professor essentially. So, that should raise some red flags for everyone listening because I think that's the hard part about any learning product is actually measuring impact. Like someone could say like I love the course, okay, like but in 6 months did you retain any of the knowledge? In 6 months are you still connected to any of the people you went through? It's one of those things that like sometimes learning isn't hyper evident right away. So it is genuinely tough to measure. It depends on like, ultimately what is our outcome? Like, let's be again real about it. We're a business. Our outcome is like money. Are people signing up for our courses? And like, are they coming back? And you could have a million hypotheses about why people come back. One might be the learning doesn't matter at all. They don't even know if they learned something or not. All that matters is like they had a good time. They felt like it was engaging. And so we're going to optimize for that. Like that's a very possible hypothesis. And that's why sometimes a business that has like a goal like learning, he kind of gets into a challenging space where like, can you prove that, is an HR company or a HR business unit inside a company going to pay for this if you can't prove out, X, Y, or Z? And there's definitely ways to do that, but that's like a common thing that's kind of hard in the space. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, talking about the connections piece of the learning, how did you look at connections? Because I know that you said it's really important to, you know, make the right five people connection for every person because that is what defines their community experience. So, can you speak about that?
Like helping people connect to the right people.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think this is like there's like two parts that I think get hard when a community scales. The first is as your members go up, you like almost by definition like lose a little bit of the personal touch. Like not everything's going to scale. If it's a group of 10 and you're like running the community, you could talk to all 10 every single day. If it's 100,000 people in the community, like you just simply cannot do that. So that gets hard. The other thing is like if there's 10, you could probably read through every profile of everyone in the community and find the person you like the best and go talk to them, and boom, you've connected to like the best possible person in that community, and you can do that yourself. There's 100,000 people, you're not going to read 99,999 profiles to decide, okay, this is the best person to talk to. And so your like hit rate on talking to the person that I should be talking to becomes a lot harder. And, I think that's a problem where community managers can help solve. And like, this is a thing where like actual automation can actually be really beneficial to increasing almost contradictorily like the personal touch or like the impact a community can have, where like you could have everyone fill out a form of like what type of person you want to meet and like what industry they're working in and what your goals are, and then using just basic algorithms and matching algorithms, like you can help connect those people. So like that's what I would focus on as a community scales, is like there's someone in this community that needs to meet someone else in this community. I don't know for why yet. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but like it definitely exists. And so many of us are like one really powerful connection away from achieving something miraculous. And how do we find a way to make those connections happen inside our communities by matching the right people at the right time, in the right context, in the right environment? And obviously there's tools for that, but that's kind of the magic sauce of community.
I think that is 100% correct and resonate with that. Okay, so talking about tools, all I'm doing in this interview is going back to what you've said in previous interviews and previous things that I've listened to and asking the follow-up questions to those things. I hope that's okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so one of the other things that you mentioned on previous another interview, which is that you went with Circle as your community platform because it's good to add friction to it. Adding friction it can be beneficial, but then you also choose Zoom for your video calling and workshop platform because it's ubiquitous and everybody's familiar with that tool. So
Hmm.
this is like a little bit of a contradictory choices for me because instead of
Yeah.
Circle, why not go with Slack, which everybody is comfortable with? So, can you speak
Yeah.
about what made you make these decisions, and how should listeners think about this?
Yeah, this is such a smart question. And like, I think my first reaction would be is like life is a series of dealing with contradictions. And probably any answer anyone gives in a certain environment, there's a contradiction somewhere in it. And I think you've pointed out a really good one. The way I would frame it is like, imagine your community is like a group of people from all over the world, like going on an 8 week vacation together. You're probably not going to like, put them all in like, you're not going to have the vacation that's like in like, they all live like around like Dayton, Ohio. You're not just going to like put it in like some venue in Dayton that they're all going to like hang out. They all kind of see normally. It's just going to feel too much like, oh yeah, this is just like part of my, it's that's like the slack, I would say. It's like I was already kind of doing this. It doesn't feel that special. What you're going to do is you're going to put them all on a plane. You're going to say we have an 8 week retreat. This is going to be a really intentional time. You're going to lock in. Like this has to feel different. I want you to feel like this feels different. Like for the entire kind of journey. You're going to fly into like Hawaii, let's say. Now, once you put them on the retreat in Hawaii, you don't need to make everything feel crazy. Like I'm not going to then like give them the world's craziest TV remote that they don't understand how to use. And that's what I would say Zoom was. Like Zoom wasn't like the home of the community. Zoom was like a tool we were using within that home of the community to deliver an outcome we wanted. And like that just didn't make sense to make that also challenging. So that's how I think about it is like your home base, if it's like a time bound, shorter, shorter run community, like 2 months or less, like I would go off Slack because people aren't going to take Slack seriously. Like it's not going to feel different enough. If you have a long community that's kind of always on, I would go with Slack because there's no way someone's going to keep coming back to Circle every single day for 2 years. So like there's a difference between maybe the home platform you're using and the tools you're using to like achieve the outcomes you want to achieve in the community. And for the tools, I would tend to use things that are everyone's going to know.
Hmm. That's a really good, nuance about whether your community is short-lived, like your community experience is short-lived, or whether it is like a always on, a year-long paid community membership. So those two are trying to solve different problems and need different
It's a great
tools.
question though. Like it definitely is.
Thank you. Okay, another question for you. So you recorded acceptance videos in the beginning that before people had paid any money. Another non-scalable thing you did was you sent DMs to every event attendee after the events, where to thank them for attending and just get their feedback on it. So what were some of like was there anything else that you did that was like really non-scalable that you maybe stopped doing in the future, but that helped in the beginning?
That's a good question. I mean, I think again, it just goes to the size. Like for those communities where we were doing the unscalable, they were capped at 150 people. And that was probably the limit of like me DMing every single person, like after an event. For example, we had some courses at 300 people and they were like less like community platform driven and more like you're on Zoom, we're kind of teaching you, and the community is like kind of happening during the course. I wouldn't message everyone after that every single time. Like the expectation was you're coming and like we're gonna have one tomorrow and the one the next day. So I don't have like a super secret formula. I think in general, the idea is like if you can message people after an event, it is better than not messaging people in a vacuum. If you have a specific situation, I could like help people maybe think through, is this a good use of your time? But like the fact of the matter is like it is better. It's just like, is it better than something else you could be doing? And at some point as a business scales, like your time probably isn't best spent DMing every single person because you got to like fix these 8 other bigger issues. And, there's obviously tension in that, but I would say like keep doing it until you literally can't. And probably the leaders that like do it for the longest win. Like, you know, Morning Brew, for example, was like responding to like individual reader emails back to Morning Brew for a while. Like I just saw Alex post about it. So, having that connection with your audience and being like, no, these are real people behind it. I think that's very important. And so the longer you can do that, the better. Eventually, I suppose it has to end in some capacity if your business is like gets really, really successful.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Okay, and about the virtual events that you did. So you did a lot of things that were unique. So, for example, one was this ritual of having the same entry music whenever a workshop or a class started.
Yeah.
What was that music?
It's this playlist called Big Desk Energy, which like a former Morning Brew employee put together, and we would play this
Yeah,
one song called Silk Jam pretty often. And it kind of become like Pavlovian, like, okay, I'm hearing the like Morning Brew music. The other option too is like, play a song that's like relevant maybe to like what you're going to be talking about. Like you're doing I don't know, a course in like new manager boot camp, you play some song about being new, or like this is the beginning or something like that. Something that's relevant, and kind of make a comment about it, make it light. That's always fun.
right. Okay. And how did you create a party in the chat?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things that like people would be surprised at how effective you can be when you just tell people your expectation. And I think I see a lot of times, I think this is a superhuman feeling that I feel as well, that like people are like embarrassed or like afraid to like really embrace what they're doing. So, you're doing a training. I just did a training for every manager at Morning Brew yesterday. And like that's pretty intimidating. And like there's a version where I could be like, oh, like, is this wasting people's time? And like this isn't going to be that good. And like if you come in with that energy, you're going to get killed. Like you're going to get killed. Like you're not even pumped about it. And so, you can't have that. Like if you're going to throw an event, like make it an amazing event and believe in it deeply and then like come in with that energy. Like there's no way that maybe athlete metaphors are overwrought now, but like there's no way LeBron James steps on the court even now and he's like, I don't have it. Like he's stepping on the court as with every NBA player and is like, I got this. And so like you kind of need to have that mindset and then you need to like tell people you have that by like setting clear expectations. Like, hey, I'm gonna do this training. I've made this as impactful as possible. I promise you, if you lock in, you are going to walk away with 1, 2, 3 things that are going to make a difference in your career. I promise you that. What I need from you is I need you to match my energy. I worked my ass off for this. I'm ready to go. I'm super stoked. So I need you to have that energy. And one way to show me you have that energy is like to activate the chat. Like this is not just for me, this is for you all. So I would love as I'm going through, like, share some comments. If you disagree, like put a different take on it. Raise your hand and throw questions at me. Like we're gonna be here together for an hour. Whether this goes smooth or not, let's make it fun. And like that's me, but that's also you. Like, can we do that? And then you get people going and like you just set the expectations. But we've all been to events where like you can tell like the host is like, hey, like here's this event and like sorry for wasting your time, like I know it's this time and like everyone doesn't want to do this but like we have to do it, and you're just like, dude, if you're not excited, like who's going to be excited? So I think you want to avoid that. It's a superhuman feeling, like, and obviously like I've done a ton of these trainings and every time I'm still like, god, I hope this goes well, but when the lights turn on you have to be like, no, like let's go, let's make this worth everyone's time, and part of that's you and part of that's them, and set clear expectations.
Right. Okay, so as you were speaking, I was so embarrassed because I have been the person who was like, okay, guys, I'm in this workshop and I don't know whether it's a good use of your time. I was the person who did not have the energy, and that was clearly a mistake on my part. So glad to know that I'm learning stuff. Okay, got it. Now, another thing was breakout parties that you did after, a workshop. So, what was the conversation that you wanted the attendees to have in these breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think it would be like, relevant to the conversation at hand. So maybe it's an hour event. You're going to talk about new manager best practices for 40 minutes, and it'll be like kind of engaging and some questions. But then after, you want to give a chance for the people in the audience who are likely new managers to interact with and to discuss with other new managers in a smaller group. And so, coming up with a set of questions, some introduction stuff, some like diving deeper in the content you talked about, sharing some challenges, and then, separating people into smaller groups and having them go through that exercise, I think is really powerful. And again, like so much of this just is like it's just like don't overthink it. Like you're a human. Like you go to an event, you hear from someone, like what do you want to do after? You probably want to talk about what you just heard. Who do you want to talk with it about? Like probably people that are like in a similar situation as you. And then like not a lot of people like are super good at like going cold into a conversation. What do they wish they had? Like a little bit of structure, a little bit of guidance, some like example questions. Okay, just like do that. And then have them go into a room and talk about it. And I think that's very effective. And it's like a nice little addition to probably any event you throw. And also like the other thing is like I would make that like opt in some capacity because some people maybe don't want to do that. They're strapped for time. And the worst thing is like you put people, if you're doing a virtual one, like you put people in a virtual breakout room and like person's on Zoom, but they're like in their kitchen, headphones out, like they haven't been really checking for like 30 minutes. That's the worst. I don't have a good tip for getting around that, but that sucks. It's a little easier in person where you can't pretend to be somewhere.
Got it. Okay. And what's the size of your breakout rooms? Two people, three people, four people?
Yeah, I find like typically like 4 to 5 is probably the sweet spot. I think after that it feels a little too big. 3 is probably like the minimum. I think 2 becomes a one-on-one conversation, which is very powerful, but it's a different beast.
Got it. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. And now, like, the final question, which is, like, final advice for the listeners who are maybe thinking about growing or starting their community businesses. So, what should they spend? Essentially, like what I'm trying to ask you is what kept you up most nights when you were building this community business? And in a sense, like what should the creators spend most of their energy trying to figure out in order to, make their communities really think?
Yeah, I think my answer for this is like what's the one thing you should be thinking about? Like I feel like I have two answers that are contradictory, and maybe I'll say
Okay.
them both. They literally are contradictory. So I can't, maybe I'm thinking about this wrong, but like I think sometimes the best advice is like build something so profoundly impactful and don't worry if it'll make money because like the money will come. Like money is like a lagging indicator that like you've built something great. And so like focus on building something great and like pour your heart and soul into it. And like if it's great, then people will find it valuable. And if they find it valuable, they're willing to give you money. That's probably like one thing. The other one that I do also genuinely believe is like the thing has to make money to be sustainable. And like take Morning Brew Learning, for example. Like, do I think we had an awesome product? Yes. Like, do I think that the people that went through our courses like had a really great experience on the whole? Yes. Do I think that there's still people that like their careers in a different place because of the courses? Like, yes. I could go yes across the board for like so many really impactful indicators. The one question I can't say yes to is this business still in existence? And so like if it was built driving so much impact, but you weren't able to keep it afloat, like now you've lost the ability to continue that impact. And that's not good. Like I just said it was all good. So like now the fact that we can't do it anymore means like the world is missing out on, something good. And that's an issue. So like you should figure out how to make it profitable and sustainable or else it goes away. So those are very contradictory answers, but I also think they're important to maybe think about in tandem. So if you're up late at night, maybe you have two thoughts like, how do I make sure that in my community, people are having like the experience they want to have, connecting with the people they need to connect with, like growing in the ways they want to grow. And the second is like, how do I make sure that I can keep delivering this impact? And it's probably like I need to pay the people on my team or pay myself or have this be somehow revenue generating enough to like keep it in existence. And both things are important.
This is beautiful. This reminds me of the Derek Sivers, what Derek Sivers often says about how life is full of contradictions and we have to just live through these contradictions. And I think this is
Yeah,
one of those things.
I totally agree. I think life is a series of contradictions to come back to this. And I think it's my philosophy major is coming out, but like that is kind of a really profound thought. Like, you know, even just like there's all this pressure to like do your best and always strive and always grow and always keep getting better, but also like there's a pressure to like accept yourself with who you are and like be comfortable with where you're at. And like there's a tension. Like maybe calling it contradiction is wrong because like people feel like it's like, oh, you're like lying, but calling it tension, I think is something that people really understand. Like you will have moments in your life where you feel tension because you're pulled in two different directions. And that's just normal. Like there's a lot going on. And so it's very normal to feel that way. It's sorry, this is like such a diatribe, but it's really interesting.
No, I love this. This is beautiful again, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. Before like, a secret final question, which is something that I offer every guest. So, is there anything that any big goal or challenge that you're trying to solve right now that I can maybe help with by sharing it with my own personal network? So, what I do is I share your question. You can be as specific as possible, and I will try to push it through all the community, all the people that I know, LinkedIn, everywhere. Anything that I can do to amplify anything.
I love it. That's a great thing. And I don't know if you have like heard of this, but and I'm gonna butcher this, but there is some like project or like study or like experiment, I guess is probably the right term that someone did where like you get 10 people in a room and you have them all be like very explicit with what they want to achieve like within a certain time frame. And if you have like 10 plus people, it's like you could get like 99% of them done just by the virtue of like someone in there knows someone in there knows someone in there that can get it done. I think it's a great way to look at life too. Like there's someone out there that can probably help you achieve exactly what you want to achieve. And it's just about finding that person. The same thing with a job. Like I think we all are very unique. Like you are you, you're the only one, blah, 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 all those like BS sayings, but they're true. You have a unique set of skills. And the goal is to find fit with a environment where those skills are super powerful. And like it's out there. Maybe it's harder to find for some people than others, and like we should definitely help fix that. But I think every person on planet Earth could thrive in some environment somewhere, and it's about getting a wide enough circle where you find that opportunity, and that's pretty much like anything in life. So I love that you do this because it's really true. Like there's someone out there that can help. Issues that we are trying to solve for. I mean, for people in New York, we're throwing a ton of events as Morning Brew in the morning. They're super fun. They're super, I mean, it's like a lot of the same stuff we were talking about with Morning Brew Learning. They're impactful, they're tactical, but they're hosted by some of our professional media publications like CFO Brew or IT Brew or HR Brew. We bring in the best of the best speakers to talk about the topics that really matter to someone. They leave with really tactical, impactful tools and tips to make their career better. You get to meet other people in the industry. It's like it's the right 200 people in a room that you really want to be in. So for anyone in New York that is interested in these, like please reach out. We'd love to have you attend or possibly sponsor as well. That would be my ask.
Amazing. Again, I'll be sure to amplify this with my own little network and try to make a dent in your goal.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation, Kyle. This is fantastic, and I learned so much, and I'm sure that that's why it could help a lot of other people too.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for having me. This was a lot of fun, and we'll have to do round three here sometime soon.
I love that. Yes, please.